Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Kelly. And good morning, listeners,
Welcome back to The Fungus Among Us.
in which we'll talk about The Last of Us, Episode 3, A Long, Long Time.
Man, what a week. How's your morning been so far?
Well, it's been a little hectic. I got up, I rewatched the episode, I made some bacon and eggs, and then I took my car to the mechanic. I think that my brake actuator, my ABS actuator, might be going out, which is not going to be cheap to fix. So that sucks. But other than that, okay. How's your morning?
Wow, it sounds like you and Joel are experiencing car troubles.
Yeah, I'm really relating to his quest for a car.
Well, my morning is drinking expired coffee, so that's giving you an indication of where I'm at in my life right
Uh,
now.
how long has it been since it expired?
A couple of months, so I think I'm in the safe zone.
It should be good. Yeah, I don't think you're going to catch anything from it.
Yeah. So, yeah, welcome back to the show. We've got a lot to talk about this episode, long, long time. All right, Paul. So, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we're going to dig into the episode. And, you referred to it in our pre-episode discussion as a movie within a movie, which is
Little
really
bit,
what it
yeah.
was. Yeah. So I think that it's a very interesting choice that they made in the adaptation to set the entire story, the core of the episode in Bill and Frank's relationship before the events of the episode. And, and they made some very bold moves, very
Yeah,
bold storytelling moves to pick apart.
certainly the biggest departure from the game so far that we have seen in the show.
That's right. Just to sort of set the stage here, would it be helpful if I just kind of recapped what Bill and Frank's relationship is in the game?
Yeah, I think so. Just because again, when I mentioned it's the biggest departure from the game, for those of you that haven't played the game, a little background on their relationship might be good.
Or even for those that have, because it's really easy to miss. Basically, like the key reveal comes from like a letter and like one cutscene. So in the game, it's a very different sequence. Joel and Ellie go to Bill's little town. He's there. They meet him, and then they go on a little adventure together, trying to get a battery. And it ends with Ellie finding a truck to get them out of town. So Bill's the same kind of character. He's a survivalist who has the whole place wired with bombs and traps, and he has a partner who has he sort of refers to in really oblique terms to Joel and says that he cut ties. And then at the end of the level, you find a man who has hung himself, and
Mm,
Bill recognizes him, and he reveals to Joel that this is his partner. And his partner was trying to steal the battery to abandon him. And then you find a letter from Frank saying, "I never liked you, Bill. You're a jerk. It looks like I'm going to die from trying to escape," because he got bit. That's why he hung himself. But it was worth it.
I think the first time I played the game too, you find a letter, and in that letter, it maybe also indicates that they were in a romantic relationship. But it's also a letter that you're not forced to pick up within the gameplay. So it is, I think, for a few reasons, it's easy maybe to miss initially that Frank and Bill were in a relationship together.
Yeah, it is. It's very easy to walk away from the sequence just thinking that he had a partner who double crossed him, and it doesn't go any deeper than that. And it's not even that big a moment. Like it's barely a blip in the story when you're playing the game.
Right, exactly. Gosh, I definitely want to get into the beginning of the episode a little bit, the mini movie within the movie with Bill and Frank. We open the show after we lose Tess in a extremely painful way, and we can find Joel mourning quietly away from Ellie, and now it's the two of them on their way to Bill and Frank.
That's right. And as a fan of the story, I have this feeling like, oh, now we're getting into the meat of it. Now it's just the two
Oh
of
yeah.
them on the road. This is The Last of Us.
And their banter together is always enjoyable to watch, and now they have to tolerate each other. They're forced to communicate because it is just the two of them.
That's right. And Joel's bringing back his dad joke from the previous episode. She says, "Is there
Yeah.
anything bad?" He says, "Only you." And she says, "It only gets funnier."
Yeah.
I'm loving this dad joke, the running dad joke.
Throughout the show, he's still brought his daddy jokes. So they're on their way to look for his stash that he and Tess presumably together have had various weapons there. And it's interesting when you're in this, I think it's a convenience store that they come across, we get a chance to see a darker version of Ellie.
That was a really interesting moment, yeah. What do you think was motivating her? So, we're, of course, talking about the moment where Ellie finds the buried infected and, does a little bit of vivisecting before she puts it down. What do you think was going through her mind there, Kelly?
So so far we've gotten to see this like inquisitive, childlike character who's been through a lot in her life. For me, what I interpreted that moment as Ellie getting a chance to kill an infected that kind of ruined her life and brought this storm of change into her life.
I was also wondering if there wasn't a little bit of, like, experimentation, she's cutting the head open and looking at the mold stuff under the skin and maybe thinking to herself, like, "If I were to cut my arm open, would I find this in there?" You know?
It's like a reveal to us as an audience, but not quite yet to Joel, that not only is she, a kid, but she's got a bit of a sadistic side.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't interpret it as sadism. Like, I thought that she had some genuine curiosity about what's going on under the skin because she
Yeah.
has it going on under her skin, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree with that for sure. Another way that Joel shows like this father protective kind of mode is when they come across a ditch where there are dead bodies. Joel wants to pivot and go another direction so that Ellie doesn't see, but she moves forward anyway.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for Joel to kind of educate her and share the true history and what the beginning was like.
Yeah, really interesting, and also a way to further explain the flower, vector of infection.
And we cut to our introduction of meeting Bill in 2003, Outbreak Day. So a lot of use of flashbacks in the show,
Yes.
which I think are done really
Yeah,
well.
yeah, I really like them, and on, the first 2 episodes, the flashbacks were at the very beginning, and in this episode, they bury it in the middle of the episode and have it become the meat of the episode.
Yeah,
It's
they
kind of an
jump
interesting
around.
subversion of the.
Yeah, no, so they jump around with time a lot in this episode. Usually that kind of throws me or bumps me, but I think it was really enjoyable here.
Yeah.
We're meeting Bill, fantastic character. Absolutely love Nick Offerman for the role. What do you think?
Oh, he was amazing. I mean, I've always loved Nick Offerman and, the texture he brought to that character and, over the arc of the story and the way that we see this character change and come out of his shell and, how vulnerable Nick Offerman makes him. I mean, it's one of the most arresting performances I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting because in my mind, I really do see him as Ron Swanson, from the character from the TV show, The Parks and Recreation. There's just several moments I felt like that were pulled out of that character that worked well for me. I mean, he opens up, with the show in his part of the show going, not today, you new world order jack boot fox.
Yeah, very Ron Swanson. Ron Swanson was always he had a survivalist streak and a skepticism about big government. So, that's the kind of part that Nick Offerman excels at. You can really see why they cast him as Bill. And then of course, that initial section of him getting set up immediately after Infection Day ends with him at the table by himself, enjoying a cut of meat and watching an infected get his head blown off on the camera, which that scene, almost exactly that same scene, was in Parks and Rec when Leslie planned the surprise birthday dinner for Ron Swanson, and he's eating steak and bacon and watching Bridge on the River Kwai.
Yeah, it definitely brought me back to that scene. Like I think you said
It
before,
was,
and yeah, go ahead.
yeah, to the point where I was like, it felt like maybe it was a deliberate reference to Ron Swanson.
Yeah, but it worked, you know. uh, And so we're, watching Bill in his isolation, kind of really almost enjoying it, I would say, like you said, he's a survivalist and that's what you know, that's his personality. Um, but then we kind of get this opportunity with Bill to exist in this unexpected, beautiful love story in a very bleak world as he's introduced to Frank. Frank is someone that was not infected and got caught in one of his traps, and that's how they initially met.
Yeah, and you can really see Bill. Bill is so resistant to having another person around for the first part, and then through that first section with Frank, and then over the course of their relationship, you see him gradually getting drawn out of his shell. And even though the show doesn't fill in the blanks, I think largely through Nick Offerman's performance and also just kind of the context of him being this gay man who had never been able to express his sexuality, you get the sense that like
Yeah.
there's all this damage that's being undone by Frank, that like there's something in Bill that's getting healed and getting drawn out over the course of this relationship. And, he's connecting to the world in a way that he never has before through Frank. And God, and then the way Nick Offerman plays it is just so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, Frank is a guy who lost all of his agency, his people. I mean, this also is probably the first time in a long time where he's felt safe too. And like, I haven't had a magical love story in my life, but like, it, you've heard about it. When two people meet, you just know. And I feel like they probably got that sense about each other.
It's hard to tell because if you meet somebody in a post-apocalyptic situation, obviously Bill is very suspicious of anybody at first.
Yeah, yeah.
But I felt like there was this growing realization, especially on Frank's part, but I think Bill was feeling it too, whereas the more time they spent together and the more that they realized that they could just exist together as two people and not have to worry about if one of them was going to become infected with mushrooms or it was going to attack the other, you could
Yeah.
sort of see this growing realization that they were feeling something about being around each other, and then, yeah, by the time. And it's funny because there's that moment at the end of the dinner where Frank's like, all right, I better go. And Bill just kind of nods and they're just looking at each other. And it's like, I don't think either of them wants him to leave,
Yeah,
but
no, you felt
Frank,
it.
yeah, yeah. And Frank kind of sees through it. He kind of sees through Bill's default, like sort of habitual suspicion. And he's like, well, okay, but before I go, I gotta check out this piano. Like he's just like buying time until Bill figures out that he wants him there.
He does welcome Frank into his home and creates a lovely meal with him, and they enjoy dinner together. Or,
And not only do they enjoy dinner together, Kelly, but did you notice what kind of wine they were drinking?
oh my gosh, you beat me to the punch. I love Beaujolais, guys. Oh my gosh. I was so jealous. I was like, I want to be at that dinner table with Ron Swanson / Bill and Frank and drink that wine with them. Definitely. That's one of my favorite wines.
I
Um,
could not believe they were drinking Beaujolais Village. I'm like, I'm doing a podcast with this show, and they're drinking this amazing wine that Kelly introduced me to that I've drank with Kelly a million times. That's like also become my favorite wine too, by the way.
yeah, it's really tasty. Um, I have a quick side story that I wanted to mention earlier, and I want to tell you now before I lose track of
Hit me.
it. When I'm first introduced to Bill, and I'm like, this guy is so interesting to watch. I'm enjoying this. Frank comes into his life. It really made me think of my time by myself in isolation and the first time you came over to my house after like me quarantining for over a year and a half or something.
Yeah, like
I
2 years
was
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you could see Bill being like, oh, like a little nervous about all the things that like Frank is touching. He's gonna touch the piano. And it just reminded me of like when you were in my apartment. I was like, don't touch this, don't touch that, stand over there.
Yeah, totally. I had to put my stuff in all these weird little cubbies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, it was the same. It was something that I think it was a level of realism in those moments that
Yeah.
we may not have, had the lived experience to bring to life before the pandemic. But yeah, all his performance of this like isolated guy having someone else in his space for the first time in years. There were like, I think my favorite part was where like Frank is just kind of like hanging out, like checking out the room. And then Bill comes out with the 2 plates of food, and there's just this very long, awkward moment where he's, like, not
Yeah.
sure how to feel about the fact that Frank is walking around the room, but then also kind of realizing, like, "Wait, he's not doing anything weird, but it feels weird." I mean, I was just
And
like,
that
"Wow,
was
yeah, I've
like
been there."
I was like, yeah, no, I was like, I've been there.
Yeah, totally,
Because I had to quarantine a little longer than you. With myself having an autoimmune disease, I just had to be a little more careful.
totally.
But I spent, spending that time in isolation and you being the first guest in my home. I was like, wow, I'm relating too hard to some of these moments between these characters.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And just also just being alone that long, it does weird
Yeah.
things to your mind. Because like I didn't have
Mhm.
to isolate for as long, but I was, by myself during the lockdowns in a studio apartment. So yeah,
Yeah.
you go a little crazy when you're by yourself that much for sure.
Yeah. But what I thought was unique about Bill is I don't think he necessarily went crazy because he was alone for at least 3 or something, 4 years, a handful of years before he was introduced to Frank. And he was someone who was clearly a survivalist. And that was his, mode of operation.
Yeah, yeah, no, not crazy. I mean, if we met him in the normal world, I don't know if we'd hang out with him. Like, I think he'd probably come off as kind of a weirdo.
We have very different perspectives on politics.
Yeah, but yeah, but I mean, I did like him. I love him in
Yeah,
the
he's,
episode, and if I
yeah.
met him after the apocalypse, I think I would probably wanna hang out with him,
Yeah, post-apocalypse, I hope we're best buds, eating
for
steak,
sure.
drinking Beaujolais.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Circling back to that exchange between Frank and Bill and showing how different they are, that's when, he suggests, we need other people in our lives. And he indicates that he's been talking to a nice woman on the radio. And then Bill goes, "You what?" And then we have a hard cut to Joel, Tess, and Frank and Bill sitting at a table eating together. One, I love the editing in this episode. I thought it just worked. Also, what a treat to see Tess again.
oh, I was so happy to see her again and to
Wasn't
see her
expecting
having
it.
yeah, and to also not just to see Tess again, but just to see her enjoying a lovely dinner with some new friends, so it's just a nice moment,
Yeah.
and she's having so much fun connecting with Frank, and, and I was like,
Oh,
"Oh,
God, they're so
good."
cute. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, "That's so good for her," for all of them, really, and then also in a different way, Joel and Bill are becoming homies because they're
Well,
both,
yeah, they really
like
reflect each other and I think mirror each other as caretakers.
yeah, they're yeah, which I think yeah, and yeah, they had, like, all their conversation at dinner is like, "Yeah, no, I get it, but, like, don't point the gun at me, man."
Yeah, and I think they know, at least Bill and Joel know that they have an ability to help each other. Resistant as Bill may be, Joel knows that there's going to be raiders, that fence is not going to keep, and that they can help each other moving forward.
Yeah. Which, was, by the way, a very deft way for the show to begin illustrating that Joel has this deep knowledge of, what kind of bad people are out there and how to deal with them, you know?
So we do cut to a scene years later where there are raiders.
Yeah, and Bill has set up an automated flamethrower defense system,
I
which
mean,
I
it's
thought was just so
wild.
fucking punk rock.
I mean, it was wild. I was like, that is something that would have that Bill would do in the game.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost like I was like, I mean, like landmines and tripwires, that makes sense. I was like, dude, he really went above and beyond rigging this like crazy ass like gas jet flamethrower system. But man, what a scene it made for.
Frank wakes up to the chaos outside and tries to bring Bill back inside, and Bill is shot. And in these moments, we think Bill is dying. He's sharing his knowledge with Frank, like, I've left you letters, basically, probably how to survive without me. So, even in what we think is Bill's death, he's still caring for Frank.
And also, just confirming how Frank thinks of Joel because he's telling him like Joel will take care of you, which is sort of I feel like this episode is very much about the idea of caretaking and living for another person and protecting and, adopting that role.
We cut to several years later where Frank is in a wheelchair and he is sick with an unknown illness. And begin to see the beginning of the end of Bill and Frank.
Yeah, and not enjoying his life. He can't do his paintings. When we jump ahead 10 years, the house is full of these amazing paintings of
Oh,
both of them,
beautiful.
but mostly of Bill. Yeah. I thought it was very sweet that his favorite subject to paint was Bill, and but he's losing his motor function, and he's clearly not a happy camper in his later years.
Yeah, and you can, see Bill as his caretaker and taking him to his paintings. And there's a moment too after Bill takes Frank to what is his last painting. There's like an exchange or a look. Walks past Frank as he's trying to paint, and you can kind of see the image of, that painting. And I think of Bill, but half of the image is, not quite what the other half of the image is. So clearly, yes, as you said,
Yeah,
his
you can
motor
see the
functions.
yeah, the painting is kind of coming apart, and yeah, I really like the little wink that Bill gives Frank there. It reminds me of one time, my grandpa and my grandma, back when they were alive, used to always wink at each other like that.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
very sweet. I know.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much said in that exchange with silence and a wink.
Well, it was interesting. There was a lot of key moments in this episode that were nonverbal. It was something that I really appreciated watching it a second time. Like a lot of the
Mm.
biggest turning points between the two of them are things that they communicate without talking, which I thought was really cool.
It was really warming to see those moments of them like jogging and like, experiencing the sweetness and taste of strawberries together, and just the way that the sunlight was like hitting both of them in that moment, and they were, going to make love. And it made me feel like so I was in love with that moment. I was in love with that scene.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, hard to jump into because it's a really tough topic. Frank wants to end his life and, poses how his last day is gonna go to Bill.
Yeah. It is a tough topic. Yeah, it was something. Well, I mean, this moment in particular was something that I struggled with because I felt like Frank had kind of sprung it on Bill the first time I watched it. And, um, and but, it's kind of unclear whether they've talked about it before the conversation that we saw on the show, which was basically that morning. And then Frank said he would like it to be done that night. And sort of, it felt very abrupt to me as a viewer. But I don't know. A lot of other people that I've talked to didn't get the feeling that that was the first time they talked about it, that it had been discussed before, you know.
Yeah.
But
So you and I talked about it a little bit, and the first time that I watched it, I didn't feel as though it was abrupt. My father has Parkinson's disease, and in a matter of 5 years, his health has, gone downhill pretty quickly. He can't walk, he can't care for himself, and my mother is his caretaker. And so, in my mind, in that moment, although granted it's not a post-apocalyptic situation my parents are in, it's still extremely difficult. I think there is this, feeling from the person who is sick to feel like a burden. And there's this other side of where there is caretaker burnout. Although Bill later on says, Frank, you were my purpose. I think it's putting Bill in an impossible situation. At the same time, I personally sense and feel as though they have had this conversation before. I don't think you go years in a relationship experiencing a horrible health condition without having these discussions of like maybe not feeling like you're worthy or feeling like you're a burden. Although I did not want it to go down this way, like first and foremost, I did not want Frank to die, and I did not want Bill to kill himself along with Frank.
No, I felt the same way, and I mean, since I had played the game, I was expecting Frank to die because Frank is dead in the game before. I mean, you never meet him,
True.
you find him as a dead person, and so I was fully expecting Bill to live because there's a whole part of the story where he's with Joel and Ellie. So it was especially shocking for Bill to also die before he had even come into the story in the way that I had expected him to from the game, and it made that moment even more powerful. And something else I was thinking about, I think that the second time I watched it, I realized that the entire first time I watched it was sort of colored by my memories of the game because I was waiting the whole time for it to get to the part where Joel and Ellie meet up with Bill. And I was really excited to see Nick Offerman join that dynamic.
I think for me too, that's why I was also extra emotional about it because I'm so attached to the story and the dynamics between Bill, Ellie, and Joel that when Bill made that decision to end his life by putting, the pills in the wine, I was like,
Enough to
"Wait,
kill
no,
a
there's"
horse.
yeah, there was something yeah, enough to kill a horse. There was something in me that was like, "Nah, something's gonna happen, like, it doesn't work, he gets sick from it, but doesn't die from it." It really threw me in terms of the story that Bill dies with Frank.
Same, yeah, and it kinda kept me a little bit more detached from the moment the first time I watched it because I was up in my head wondering about, like, "Oh, are they changing it? What's But what I found is that
Yeah.
I watched the whole episode a second time, and then I watched just the Bill and Frank section a third time, and,
Oh.
every time I watch it, I get a little bit more used to the idea and sort of understand it a little bit more, but there's definitely some stuff that I feel like got left on the table that I miss from the game that wasn't able to be in the show because of the choice to handle it the way they did.
I think for me, it felt like I was really in their world and that I got to know these characters and I got to know these people and their personalities.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, in a half hour, they emerge as extremely three-dimensional characters. I mean, they emerge as three-dimensional characters within the first 10 minutes or something. So, uh, you know, I
That's a great
I
point,
definitely
I think.
of their story, yeah, by the time they finish dinner, like, we have a really good sense of who these 2 guys are, thanks to some subtle writing and some amazing performances, and so is it a narrative detour? Amazing. Both of them. I mean, I was mostly focused on Nick Offerman, and he had kind of a heavier lift because he was playing a character who was, like, super repressed and had all these, like, fears and stuff, but they were both amazing.
Also, not just like departing from the game, like Nick Offerman and Bella Ramsey as actors together,
Like,
that would be cool.
yeah, like, seeing Bella Ramsey's Ellie sassing Nick Offerman's Bill and then him calling her a little brat and shit, like, it would have been
Yeah.
sublime. Yeah, I'm sorry, it would have
Yeah.
been amazing.
That is the only hang up that I have about it. But
That's really if I
yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much my only one too. Everything else, I don't mind. I mean, the action would have been cool, but yeah,
Oh,
I do
yeah,
miss,
absolutely.
but I do miss Bill and Ellie, and Joel having to be the peacemaker, which is also a hilarious position to put him in, It
I
would have
mean,
been
can you
great.
guys tell that we're super bummed that Ellie is not gonna meet Bill?
I don't know, I think
And
just in case they don't get it, we should probably talk about it for another 5 minutes at least.
Um, so it must be months later, when after they have ended their lives that Joel well, wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Well, anyway,
I was wondering about the timeline. It's a little unclear. I don't yeah, I think Joel yeah, it's a good question. I don't know how much later because they do establish that for some reason this was actually something that I wondered about. Like Joel goes downstairs and he finds the little setup where Bill has the like music playlist just playing on loop, you know? It like triggered automatically and it was playing 80s music, which is like the SOS something bad is happening station. So I guess Bill just had it set up to where that way if he died, it would just start playing the SOS music or something to let Joel know something bad had happened.
oh, yeah. Well,
So
I
I guess
think we
that's
should
so
get
I guess that's what it
to
was.
but I think we should get to the letter that Bill left for Joel. Again, I think over the years, they were able to understand that they were protectors. And Ellie's reading the letter, and it gets to a part where it's clearly going to mention Tess. So Joel grabs that letter, and Bill is saying, like, protect your loved ones, protect Tess.
In the game, Bill is this like isolationist guy who is so crazy about it that he's actually driven his partner Frank away. Bill represented sort of Joel's ultra cautious, keep everybody at arm's length approach to life taken to an extreme, and like what the outcome of that kind of thought was, you
Yeah.
know? And so Bill was like this cautionary tale for Joel, that like he needs to learn to let people in or everybody will leave him and he'll die alone. And the show, I think, kind of flipped that upside down. Bill, instead of that, he was a guy who had overcome that kind of a mindset and had enjoyed a life of connection and love because he'd been able to overcome it. And so instead of being like a cautionary tale for Joel, he's more something to aspire to, and so he leaves Joel that letter telling him like, this is our role to be protectors, et cetera, which is his way of saying like, basically, like you need to connect with people.
For the first time, we see Joel actually committing to the role of taking Ellie on as a responsibility. Although they've had their journey together so far, it's like you can see he's finally making the choice.
That yeah, and that's the moment where he lays down his ground rules and stuff like that, which is a scene that's taken directly out of the game. And in the game, it happens before they go to Bill's place.
But, so you see Joel get, he's relieved that there's the battery in the car, and they get in that car that I was just like, brought me right back to the game. I continue to be fascinated by Ellie's reactions to like new experiences and new things, something like buckling your seatbelt,
Such
So
a
it's kind
great
of
detail. She
interesting.
doesn't even
Yeah.
know what it is or what it's for.
And she's like, whoa, so cool. And I'm like, oh my God, it is cool. Starting to see that relationship form between them really excites me.
It was a complicated and beautiful episode that really defied our expectations. I'm curious to see, once the entire story has been told, how I feel about this episode's place in it.
We end on a window frame, just like in the opening of, the game before you press play. And I love the symbolism of windows to me. I always like in my stories and things I've written have incorporated windows somehow, just because I feel like they represent hope, change, being stuck. But it was a beautiful way to like frame them out driving off together.
Yeah, that was. And also a great way to add extra depth to that moment of them like finding an old tape and playing it as they drove in the game. And in this one, they play the Linda Ronstadt song that's been hanging over the whole episode. That's like at the core of their relationship and stuff. That was a heavy ending. I mean, obviously at that ending, you have to cry. I cried. I think everybody would.
I enjoyed the deviation from the game. However, I'm looking forward, as always, to the next one.
I am too. I can't wait to see where it goes next, especially now that the show's demonstrated that it has the capacity to surprise me so much,
We really want to thank you all for tuning in to The Fungus Among Us.
That's right. And before we wrap things up, we'd like to acknowledge Annie Wershing, the actress who played Tess in the game. She just recently passed away, so we want to remember her great work. She really did an amazing job with Tess, and we've really enjoyed seeing Anna Torv's performance in the show, but Annie did something completely different and really powerful in the game. Video game Tess was such a badass. So thoughts to Annie's loved ones and family, and we'd like to dedicate this episode to her.
We hope you all have a wonderful week and look forward to next time.